Every single day is different. That's what I love about it. I'm finding my balance. You're in the second quarter of your life. Am I proud of what I did? Yes. At 42, I have reached a place I once believed belonged only to the men I watched from the edge of the field. Canton is waiting, and people keep asking what it feels like to be called one of the greatest. The truth is that word has never made me think about myself. It takes me back to Minnesota when I was still carrying footballs and studying the way veteran receivers move. It takes me back to Arizona, where one teammate showed me how much punishment a man could absorb without allowing it to change his purpose. And it takes me back to Sundays when certain opponents could bend an entire defense before the ball was even snapped. I played 17 seasons, but I never believed I had finished learning the position. 5 wide receivers stayed with me because each one exposed something I still lacked. So who were the 5 men who shaped the way I understood greatness, and why could only one of them stand at number 1? Number 5, Anquan Boldin. The first time I saw Anquan in person, I remember thinking he was smaller than the man I had built in my mind. I had watched him during my final year at Pittsburgh running through defenders as a rookie in Arizona, and from a distance he looked enormous. Then I arrived in 2004, stood beside him at practice, and realized the truth. He was not unusually tall. He simply played as if size were a decision. That stayed with me. Anquan never ran a route as though he were asking for space. He took the space. His shoulders stayed square. His hands were violent at the catch point, and after the ball arrived, the play often became personal. Defensive backs wanted to bring him down cleanly. He made them carry him. I was younger then, still learning how much of this position happened after the catch, after the design of the play had already ended. I had always trusted my hands. Anquan taught me to trust my body. The memory I returned to came in 2008 against the New York Jets at the Meadowlands. The game was already slipping away from us when Anquan went down late. I was one of the first teammates to reach him. Football usually gives you something to do. You line up again. You listen for the call. You prepare for the next snap. In that moment, there was nothing I could do. I was frightened, and I cried. Later, when I saw him receiving medical attention, Anquan looked at me and asked why I was crying. I told him I hated seeing him that way. His answer was simple. He said he was going to be all right. That was Anquan. Even then, he was the one calming everybody else. Less than a month later, he returned against Carolina. I can still picture the play. He caught the ball on a whip route, turned upfield, and drove through 2 defenders for a touchdown. It did not look like a comeback designed for applause. It looked like Anquan resuming a conversation he had never considered finished. People sometimes confuse toughness with anger. Anquan was never tough because he wanted people to notice. He was tough because the work still had to be done. Years later, I called him the toughest football player I ever played with or against, and I meant it without hesitation. Playing beside him corrected something in me. It made me less concerned with how a catch looked and more concerned with what happened after contact. He taught me that reliability has weight. Your teammates should feel it when you enter the huddle. Anquan showed me how much strength a receiver could carry. The next man on this list made me wonder how much talent one body could possibly hold. Number 4, Calvin Johnson. The first time I studied Calvin closely, I remember laughing a little. Not because anything was funny. It was the kind of laugh that comes when your eyes are telling you something your experience cannot explain. He was built like a tight end, but he did not move like one. His stride opened so easily that defensive backs seemed to lose ground without realizing it. Then the ball would rise, 2 men would be waiting, and Calvin would simply reach above the problem. By 2012, I had played enough football to understand what could be taught. Route detail could be taught, timing could be sharpened, hands could be trained until they became dependable. Calvin reminded me that some gifts arrive before coaching ever touches them. We played Detroit in Arizona late that season. Our year had been difficult, and we entered that Sunday carrying 9 straight losses. We won 38-10, but the score never told the whole story. Calvin still caught 10 passes for 121 yards. We changed coverages. Patrick Peterson challenged him most of the afternoon. Safeties leaned in his direction. None of it made him disappear. That was what stayed with me. Most receivers need the play to create an advantage. Calvin could become the advantage. A quarterback could leave the ball too high, too far outside, or a little late, and Calvin's body seemed to correct the mistake. His catch radius was not only about long arms. It was about balanced timing and the certainty that the football belonged to him once it entered his space. Earlier that year, people were talking about contracts and which receiver deserved to be paid the most. At the time, I was the highest paid player at our position. I said Calvin should pass me. Some people treated that as modesty. It was not. I had watched the film. I knew what I was seeing. What impressed me just as much was how little noise he made away from the field. The nickname sounded mechanical and oversized. The man himself was calm. He did not need to perform greatness in a room. He saved that part for Sundays. Calvin corrected a different weakness in me than Anquan had. Anquan taught me that strength could be built through contact and repetition. Calvin taught me to respect what another man had been given without turning that respect into jealousy. Competition can make you insecure. You start measuring another player's gifts against your own. I learned to stop doing that. You study a man like Calvin to understand the limits of the position, then you return to your own work. I could not become 6'5". I could not borrow his stride, but I could become more exact with what I had. Calvin showed me that talent can widen the field. The next man taught me how discipline could make every inch of it matter. Number 3, Cris Carter. Before I understood professional football, I understood the sound of a ball striking a receiver's hands. I heard it every summer in Mankato, standing near the Vikings practice field as a teenage ball boy. There were louder men around me and faster men too, but Cris Carter was the one I watched when the work became quiet. He never wasted a repetition. Cris would move toward the sideline, extend one hand, secure the football, then place both feet inside the boundary as if someone had drawn the answer on the grass. In high school, I did not need that skill yet. Still, I copied it. I would catch with one hand, look down, and check my feet. Then I would do it again. That was the first lesson. Preparation often begins before life gives you a reason for it. People remember Cris for his hands, and they should, but his hands were only the final part of the process. He understood leverage. He knew how to lean into a defender without giving away the route. He knew when to slow down, when to let the quarterback see his numbers, and how to make a narrow window feel wider than it was. Watching him was like watching a carpenter measure the same piece of wood twice. Nothing looked rushed because nothing had been left to chance. One afternoon, the equipment staff turned the jugs machine toward the sky and sent punts into the wind. I stood underneath them while Cris, Randy, Moss, and some of the older players watched. I was young enough to feel every set of eyes, but too stubborn to step away. The ball would drift, I would move beneath it, and I kept making the catch. I did not know then that Cris had noticed me. I was just trying not to interrupt practice. Years later, I understood that those small moments mattered. The men I studied had begun studying me. What stayed with me most was not praise. It was the standard Cris carried when the ball was not coming his way. I watched him block. I watched him run routes that cleared space for Randy. I saw a great receiver accept an ordinary assignment because the offense needed it. That lesson followed me to Arizona. In 2016, I passed Cris on the career receptions list. People treated it as a milestone, but my mind went back to Minnesota. I remember being a kid at the edge of practice, trying to keep my hat from falling off and hoping I would not drop the next ball. Passing his number never made me feel above him. It reminded me how far his example had carried me. Cris taught me that dependable hands begin with disciplined feet and that a receiver's value cannot always be found beside his name. The next man showed me what happened when that discipline was joined with a kind of speed that could frighten an entire defense. Number 2, Randy Moss. Before I knew what an NFL route was supposed to look like, I knew what happened when Randy Moss started running. The noise inside the Metrodome changed. People did not wait for the football to leave the quarterback's hand. They rose when Randy cleared the first defender because everybody in that building understood what might come next. I was a teenager, then working as a Vikings ball boy and trying to stay out of the way. Randy never looked as if he was straining. That was the part I could not understand. Other receivers seemed to gather speed. Randy simply had it. A cornerback could be in good position at the snap, and 3 steps later, he was already asking a safety for help. The season I remember most was 1998. Minnesota had won 15 games and hosted Atlanta in the NFC Championship game at the Metrodome. My father had told my brother and me that he would take us to the Super Bowl if the Vikings made it. For a kid from Minneapolis, that promise felt close enough to touch. Early in the game, Randall Cunningham found Randy deep for a touchdown. I remember the roof holding all that sound and throwing it back at us. That was what Randy could do. He could make one route feel larger than the entire game. Then the afternoon changed. Atlanta stayed close. The game went into overtime, and Minnesota lost 30-27. That one still stings. What I carried from that day, though, was not only the disappointment. I remembered how every defender had known where Randy was and how none of that knowledge had removed the fear. That was his gift. Randy changed the defense before the snap. Safeties backed away from the line. Corners turned their hips earlier than they wanted. Space opened for other people because one man was running toward the far end of the field. His speed was physical, but the pressure he created was mental. He made defenders imagine the worst outcome before it happened. I could never play exactly that way. I did not have Randy's stride or his sudden separation. Watching him helped me understand that influence was not measured only by catches. Sometimes your greatest contribution was the space your presence created for somebody else. Years later, Randy was the man waiting to tell me I had been elected to the Hall of Fame. I stepped onto that boat and saw the same player I had watched as a boy in Minnesota. For a moment, the years between us felt very small. I have been called a mentor by younger receivers. But before that, I was a kid watching Randy make a whole stadium stand up. He taught me to dream beyond the route in front of me. The man at number one taught me what it would cost to keep chasing that dream for an entire career. Number one, Jerry Rice. There is a strange thing about chasing a man you admired before you ever met him. At first, the distance feels useful. It gives you direction. You study the film, borrow a habit, and tell yourself that one day the gap might become small enough to measure. With Jerry Rice, the closer I came, the larger the standard seemed. I watched how he entered routes with the same purpose, whether the play was designed for him or for someone else. His feet never looked hurried. His shoulders gave defenders almost nothing to read. Then he would come out of the break exactly where the quarterback expected him. People remember the catches, but the separation had usually been earned several seconds earlier. That was Jerry's real advantage. He turned preparation into timing and timing into trust. In 2019, Seattle came to State Farm Stadium. I entered that afternoon close to passing Tony Gonzalez for second place on the career receptions list. Jerry was there on the sideline. I caught 5 passes that day, and one of them moved me into second place. The game itself did not give us much to celebrate. We lost, and I have never been comfortable treating an individual milestone like a victory when the team walks away beaten. Still, seeing Jerry there gave the moment a weight I could not ignore. The man whose records had followed every receiver of my generation was standing only a few yards away while I moved closer to one of them, closer but still behind them. That is why Jerry stands at number one. Anquan showed me toughness. Calvin showed me how far physical talent could stretch the position. Cris taught me the discipline hidden inside dependable hands. Randy showed me how one receiver could frighten an entire defense. Jerry carried pieces of all those qualities, then repeated them across seasons, quarterbacks, injuries, and changing versions of the game. He did not give greatness a single shape. He gave it endurance. I finished my career second to Jerry in receptions and receiving yards. For a while, people asked whether I might catch him. Those questions never bothered me, but they also missed the point. The numbers were only the visible part of the distance. The harder part was maintaining his standard every day long after talent had stopped feeling new and the body had begun sending different messages. Jerry made excellence look permanent. I learned that it never is. It has to be rebuilt every morning. When I think about this list now, I do not place him first because I came closest to his records. I place him first because getting close taught me how difficult his life's work had been. Some players give you something to chase. Jerry Rice gave every receiver who followed him a way to measure the chase. When I look back now, I do not see 5 names arranged on a list. I see 5 different parts of the receiver I was still trying to become. Anquan Boldin taught me that toughness was not something a man announced. It was the decision to keep doing the work after the game had taken something from you. Calvin Johnson reminded me that another man's talent did not diminish my own. His gifts were rare, but respecting them helped me understand the responsibility I had toward the gifts I had been given. Cris Carter showed me that dependable hands begin long before the football arrives. They begin with disciplined feet, careful preparation, and a willingness to perform small tasks that most people will never remember. Randy Moss made the field feel larger. Watching him as a boy gave me permission to imagine a future beyond the sideline where I was standing. And Jerry Rice gave that future a standard. Now at 42, I am preparing to enter Canton. People will speak about receptions, yards, seasons, and records. I understand why those numbers matter. They preserve part of the journey. But they cannot tell you what it felt like to stand beside Anquan after a difficult afternoon, to study Calvin on film, or to copy Cris and Randy when I was still young enough to believe they belonged to another world. Numbers cannot explain what it meant to move closer to Jerry and discover that the distance still deserved respect. I spent 17 seasons playing wide receiver, but I never felt that I had mastered the position. Every year exposed another detail I had overlooked. Every great player showed me another way the job could be done. Maybe that is what remains after the stadium grows quiet. The records tell people where you finished. The men you remember explain how you arrived there. So when someone asks me which receiver was the greatest, I can give them a name. But when they ask who shaped me, the answer has never belonged to only one man. Greatness may be recorded in a book. Its real weight is carried by the people who witnessed it.